Welcome everybody who has joined already. We're just going to give one more minute to let any latecomers join, and then we will get started. Okay, just to repeat that to anybody who's just joined, we're going to give about half a minute more to allow others to join, and then we'll get started. Okay, a very warm welcome to everybody. Hopefully you're all here to talk about South Yorkshire and the UK Shared Prosperity Fund. This is a very tight time task, so the government haven't given us a very long time to work on this. So we're just going to make some quick introductions so you understand who I am. My name's Andrew Laird, and I'm from an organisation called Mutual Ventures, and I'm here with my colleague Campbell MacDonald, and we're working with the MCA, the Mayoral Combined Authority, and also the four councils in helping prepare the investment plan, which I will explain in a little bit more detail. Today's session is about sharing information. There are quite a lot of people on this call, so unfortunately we will not have an opportunity for an open Q&A, but what we will do is be explaining your opportunity to engage through an email address, so you can put forward ideas or questions that you have. The other thing we will be doing is another webinar closer to the time of submitting the investment plan. We will also be recording this session so you can watch it back yourself, or you can share it with colleagues. We will also be sharing the slides, so there's no need to take any screenshots or frantically write down any information or anything like that. So the purposes of this session is threefold really. It's to provide a briefing on what the UK Shared Prosperity Fund is all about, what it means, what its priorities are. We will also describe how South Yorkshire is developing its investment plan, which is the key bit of documentation around the Shared Prosperity Fund. And then we also want to ensure that all stakeholders are aware of how they can submit their views. So on the UK Shared Prosperity Fund itself, it's a UK-wide fund, so it's in all four nations and all across England. It's structured in quite an unusual way, where in areas that there is a combined authority, the funding is channeling through that. But in other areas of the country, like in a county, for instance, like Kent, the funding is going directly to district councils. And then across the country as well, if there are any single tier authorities who are not part of a combined authority, then the funding is going directly to them. So some areas have a large pot to play with across over a larger population, and some areas have a very small pot. So in terms of what it's all about, the key thing here is building pride in place and increasing life chances. Now, in order to achieve that, the fund is structured around three key areas. One is communities in place, and that's exactly what it sounds like. That's local areas, improving high streets, regeneration, being very local and very specific to an individual area's needs. The second area is local business. So this is very much about trying to encourage local enterprise, to encourage green industry, to create that real thriving area feel that we all want to see in each of our areas. And then the third area, people and skills, is exactly, again, what it says in the tin. It's trying to support particularly economically inactive people back into activity to lead more fulfilling lives. And there's a really key element there about giving people the skills they need to participate and live a rewarding, fulfilling life. The fourth element of it is not what we're talking about today, but it's a program called Multiply that will be run by the Department for Education, and that is all about increasing the level of adult numeracy across the country, but that's not what we're talking about today. So I mentioned earlier investment plans. So what the combined authority has to do alongside the four councils is to develop what's known as an investment plan, and it's almost like an application, it's almost like a business case, and it has three key elements to it. So the first is we will need to describe the local context in quite a bit of detail. So this is about gathering evidence of what the challenges are across the four councils and across the whole region, and it's about thinking about opportunities as well. And again, everything through it is structured around those three key priority areas. So communities in place, supporting local businesses, and people and skills. So that's the first bit. So you can imagine if you're reading this investment plan, you've now read local context and you can think, right, okay, South Yorkshire, I understand exactly what the challenges and opportunities are there. Then the second bit is, okay, what are you going to do about that? And that's when we talk about interventions and outcomes. So the government have very helpfully suggested 41 interventions that each area can choose from. Now, we're not limited to those, but they have suggested 41 and they do cover a wide range of areas. So I'll give you some examples just to put some color around this. So in the communities and place space, an example would be, and I'm reading this exactly, investment in community engagement schemes to support local regeneration decisions. So there's a whole list of interventions which cover a whole range of areas, but that is an example of what an intervention is. Second area is supporting businesses. An example is investment in open markets and improvement to town centre retail infrastructure. So again, you can really see how that would be supporting local businesses, and it's quite a specific intervention. And then in people and skills, an example is a range of interventions supporting economically inactive people, including training and things like that. So you could really imagine a local scheme where there's a particular group of people, there's a particular industrial need maybe, or a business need, and you're very focused on supporting those people to engage in that market. So those are the interventions, but then more important almost are the outputs and outcomes. So that's fine. We've identified the challenges. We've identified the interventions. We also need to be very specific about what outcomes we expect to see. Then once you've done that, they're also very interested in our ability to actually deliver what we're going to say, and not only the technical expertise for delivering, but also how key decisions will be made. So governance is very important there as well. And then, as always, we're talking about a large amount of, or I said, a relatively large amount of money here. So expenditure and deliverables plotted in a budget are extremely important as well. And then also the combined authority, along with the councils, will have to demonstrate the resource that it will put in to managing this funding. So, like I said earlier, there's not a lot of time here. So the investment plan window opens at the end of this month, and plans have to be submitted by the 1st of August. So you can appreciate this hasn't been open for long at all, and it's not a very long time. So, like I said, we're doing today as more of an information giving exercise. There'll be an opportunity for everybody to send in ideas, and then we will come back with another webinar later. First payments from the scheme will be made in October of this year once government has signed off on the investment plan. Sorry, apologies, my voice is quite croaky today. The funding period runs up to March 2025. It does start from April this year, so if there is expenditure that has already begun, it is possible to actually put in your investment plan that expenditure, but it has to be for this year only. So expenditure that took place last year up to the 31st of March 2022 can't be included. And the other important thing to note is that for the skills interventions, that expenditure can only happen from 2024 onwards. So South Yorkshire's mayoral combined authorities total allocation is just under 40 million. Once we have a plan in place, then any underspend each year is returned and clawed back. One of the key things here is that you may have been involved in levelling up bids. Now, levelling up is running alongside this. It's mostly based around infrastructure spending. This is mostly around people and skills, but the Shared Prosperity Fund does not require match funding. But like any good use of government funding, if it can act as a catalyst for other investment, like private investment, then obviously that is a very powerful thing, but it's not needed to be demonstrated within the investment plan. But if you think about it, investing in local businesses, investing in people and skills, if that didn't result in increased investment from the private sector, then it wouldn't have worked. The other important thing to note is that unlike the Levelling Up Fund, this is mostly a revenue fund. So there is a minimum amount of capital funding that should be included, but it's minimal. It averages out around 12 to 15% over the 3-year period. So just in terms of other considerations that you should have in your heads, and we certainly have working with the MCA and the 4 councils, is that stakeholder engagement is important. It's important that we do this type of exercise and continue a dialogue. The MCA is very engaged with each of the 4 councils. In fact, it's operating as one seamless group at the minute, and that's really important. It needs to align with other policies and plans. So there will be plans, there are plans which exist at the council level, but also at the MCA level. Whatever our propositions within this investment plan is, it all has to fit together. So we're obviously paying close attention to the plans which have already been agreed. And it's important that this works alongside and supports those plans. Partnership working is important. Now, that this is less of a challenge for this bid because the 4 councils are already working with each other, but it's more one aimed at, let's say, a small district in Kent, for instance, that really hasn't got that much funding, and it makes sense for it to work with a wider group. But I think as an MCA grouping, we're already showing that we are working in partnership with neighbours. Alignment with other funding schemes, I've mentioned the Levelling Up Fund, there's also the Towns Fund and a number of other funding streams which have been going on over the past years and are still going on. And it's important just to show that this isn't double counting anything, that this isn't trying to do the same thing with with a different pot of money. So we just have to show that we are what we're doing not only aligns with local strategies, but also existing uses of government funding. Then there's devolved decision making. The mayoral combined authority has overall accountability for outcomes, but it is really keen, and this is working with the 4 councils as well, to devolve decision making as close to communities as possible. Now that makes sense for instance, interventions around communities in place. It makes sense that is devolved, but there is likely to be things on the business side and the people and skills side that actually it makes a lot of sense for that to be done at a combined authority level. And then of course we can't escape monitoring and evaluation. That there are objectives which I will talk about in a second, which are aligned to the Levelling Up white paper missions, but based on what interventions and outcomes we choose here, we will need to have our own monitoring and evaluation process. There's no escaping that. So I mentioned the Levelling Up white paper. This is the most significant piece of policy writing that has been produced by government in over 2 years, I would say. It's very broad ranging, and even though the name of this fund isn't the Levelling Up Fund, there's a separate fund for that. It is very much aimed at levelling up. Everything about this leads into one of the missions, which were in the Levelling Up white paper. So the really important one is that Pride in Place one, which is mission 9 in the Levelling Up white paper. That is a very, very key priority of all of this. We want people, and the government wants people, and the MCA and the 4 councils want people to feel really proud of their place. They want their place to be thriving, and that runs through everything. Against the 3 key elements there: communities in place, supporting local business, people and skills. There are 6 other missions within the Levelling Up white paper which are very relevant here. The first one is around pay, employment and productivity, public and private investment increase. So I mentioned earlier that this is very much a public investment, but I don't think we can judge it a success unless it increases economic activity and external investment. Number 6 there is high quality skills training. Number 7 is healthy life expectancy. There's well-being improved, and there's violence and crime fallen. Now, I haven't misnumbered these. These are the numbers that refer to the missions in the Levelling Up white paper. So it is very deliberate that those numbers make no sense as a run. So then, let's say we've submitted our plan. What sort of ideas might be in there for the mechanism for how funding would get spent? So just moving along the arc there from number 1 through to 6, there is the potential for direct in-house delivery within a council. This might be a programme that the council runs itself. The council or the MCA could just assume every time it mentions council here, I'm talking about the council or mayoral combined authority. Procurement of services, so that's traditional, what every council and MCA does. They might put a tender out, say, right, we want somebody to do this, maybe a bit of skills training, something like that. Number 3 there is joint venture between the council and a third-party organisation. That's potentially an exciting one, where it's a joint venture where the council does some things, maybe a third sector organisation does other things, but it's very much working in complete partnership. There is the option for loans to organisations or businesses. Obviously, the advantage of loans over grants is that loans, the hope is that they eventually are paid back and that funding gets recycled. Number 5 there is the flip side of that, which is grants. So quite a few of these funding streams, an entity like the combined authority would receive a pot of funding, but then might decide to do its own grant giving process, which would be inviting people to submit plans, submit ideas, and then decisions have to be taken about what things to actually fund. And that can be at that level, but also community-led local development grants are an option as well. So I'm going to unshare here, and I'm going to let Campbell pick up for the next bit. Campbell, over to you.
Thanks very much, Andrew. I hope everyone's able to hear me. So I'm now going to just put up the same slides and take over from where Andrew was. So I hope everybody is able to see that. Can you see that, Andrew? Great.
Yeah.
So what I wanted to do here was just give everybody a bit more of a detailed flavour of how the mayoral authority working with all of the councils is trying to get to that investment plan output that Andrew described, and hopefully to give a sense of a bit of the rigor in spite of this very tight timed process, a bit of the rigor and the level of effort that's going into that. So the first thing I wanted to show you, and this might look like there's a lot going on this slide, but what I wanted to demonstrate was that there is a clear logic, a theory of change logic that sits at the heart of building this investment plan. The plan, the SPF process doesn't mandate that you have an explicit theory of change unless you want to go off the prescribed list of 41 interventions and come up with some of your own, in which case you do need a specific theory of change. But nonetheless, in order to put some real rigor behind the thinking and the evidencing process, the region is going to use a theory of change process. So what that means is we start by finding that evidence, identifying those local challenges and opportunities, as Andrew mentioned, under each of these headings. And we identify a clear set of outcomes. They've got to align to those leveling up missions, as Andrew mentioned, but they also need to align to the relevant strategic priorities in each of the councils and the mayoral authority overall. So we start by identifying, if you like, the drivers at the very beginning and where we want to get to, and then move in to fill in the detail. So under each of the areas, the priority investment areas, we start to draw out which are the interventions that are going to produce the outcomes that are going to drive the highest level of impact, the highest level of benefit. And the critical point here is that we've brought together the mayoral authority and representatives from all of those councils to co-design a very clear strategic framework. And that is in order to have some logic that flows down through local choices, but also to ensure that subsidiarity point is protected, to ensure that the strategic framework is credible enough that those local specific project support decisions can be made in the future, and that the department is comfortable and confident in the ability locally to do that. So this is the process that we're going to take, and we're working through each of these interventions. And what we want to do is we want to get as rich a set of input as we can. So moving on to the next slide. As Andrew said, the timings mean that this is a tightly run process, but we've tried to put some structure around how we hear from local partners, local stakeholders, and we engage. And what you'll see here, therefore, is that if I start on the third box down, there is a steering group that has accountable leads from each of the authorities involved and is driving that process of agreeing the theory of change, agreeing the strategic decision-making framework, and starting to identify specific interventions. Below that, there are named individuals who work very closely with Andrew and I to pull out the relevant data and evidence and really start to build and write, if you like, that investment case. And then what we're doing is creating a partnership board. Now, this is something that the process asks you to do, and it will include a group of, and remember, the funding is held, if you like, the accountability for the distribution of funding is held at the MCA level. That partnership board is required to sit at an MCA level. So the MCA is pulling together a group of key stakeholders to sit in that partnership board arrangement. And then what we're doing today is the start of that top box, which is trying our best within the timelines we've got to run a genuinely open feedback process so that we can allow people to contribute challenges, ideas, thoughts into this design process. And then the final slide I'm going to do for this this short section is just to give you a flavor of that very tight timeline. So what you can see is a process picking up on specific exercises to identify those strategic challenges and those outcomes, and then to move into identifying specific interventions. Underlying that, there's a data collection, getting that evidence. We need to evidence both the challenges and then each intervention. We're starting this engagement process with local partners and stakeholders. It will have some tight timelines on it. I will say a bit more about that in a moment. Then we need to actually come up with that plan. And the submission deadline for the plan is the 1st of August. And what you would imagine, given the complexity of a mayoral authority and 4 local councils, is that we need to work back through a good chunk of July to make sure that the sign-off processes can be met and delivered. So you can see how tight a time frame we're working with at the moment. So apologies on our part that that's the case, but this is the time frame that has been set by the government to get this investment plan submitted. And then if I just move us on, just a final slide to really talk about how local partners can contribute to this. So don't worry about these links. As Andrew said, we're gonna share this this set of slides. So the first thing you probably want to do is maybe find out a bit more. So if you want to dig into a bit more detail, there's 2 useful exercises probably. So one is to look at the prospectus. Now it's very technically policy heavy, that prospectus. It may be more useful to go and have a look at the list of interventions and outcomes, because it'll give you that immediate detailed flavor that Andrew was talking about. Those are on .gov.uk, but like I said, this link will be active when we share this slide set. In addition, the MCA have created a web page. We'll get a link to that web page and we'll include it on this deck when we send it out. And the context, if you like, certainly at the MCA level, can be found in some of the key strategic documents that already exist. So the SEP, the Strategic Economic Plan, the more recent Renewal Action Plan. So if you want to understand, if you like, a bit more of the strategic flavor of how we're trying to get to that aligned framework, that decision-making framework, then it will marry up against the headlines in those local strategic plans. And of course, each council is feeding in its own plan into that thinking as well. And then the second piece is around how you can contribute. So I think the first thing to say up front is I'd be amazed if you don't have some practical questions. So some practical questions about what you've heard today, about the nature of the process, about what you should or shouldn't spend time feeding in, and so on. About the detail of the funding choices. So what we're encouraging everybody to do is to use this email address, and like I said, it will be shared with everybody subsequent to the session. Use that email address. If you have practical questions, then by all means send them in. The MCA is going to collate those, and over the next 2 to 3 days, and of course there's a bit of a caveat on that depending on how many questions there are, but we'll try to respond fairly quickly to those questions. In terms of a more substantive contribution, thoughts about a specific intervention that you think should be a priority, for instance, then those are contributions that we welcome. But given the timeline, what we're not going to be able to do is respond to each specific contribution that comes in. But those contributions will, as the previous slide showed, be fed into the partnership board, and they'll be fed directly into the steering group as well. So they will materially be seen by and influence the process of coming up with this investment plan. And there's quite a tight timeline, I'm afraid, on responses of both kinds. So we really do need people to respond by Friday, June the 24th, to give us a meaningful time to share that with the partnership group, have it thought about, have the steering group process it, and then have that be able to be reflected in the drafting of the plan. So I hope that what we've presented today is helpful. I'm going to just take these slides down quickly. I hope that that's been really, really helpful. And final point, I think, is we are recording this session. So the recording of the session will also be available on the webpage, and when it's ready, we'll send it out so that it's easy to forward and share with local partners and people who you think might have valuable contributions to make. So on behalf of Andrew and I, thank you if you've joined today. I hope it's been helpful. It's not taken the hour that was put into diaries, and so get a little bit of time back this morning. But look forward to hearing from people, and yeah, hopefully it gives you a little reassurance and a little confidence in the rigor of the process that we're trying to run for the Mayoral Combined Authority and each of the councils. So many thanks, everybody. Take good care, and we'll see you when we do our next webinar in a couple of weeks' time. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Many thanks all. Bye.